guys. So today we are starting a new chapter. So we're looking at a new region for our world geography studies. So we're actually focusing on South America, and more specifically, we're focusing on Caribbean South America first. So this area is populated, well, not populated. Let's save that. Let's first just talk about the land. So it has a lot of different features to it. So the Andes Mountains run through Colombia and go up the west coast of South America. And so they have these mountain ranges that create different opportunities and landscapes there. They also have one of the biggest rivers in South America flows through that region. And they also have some other rivers and lakes that are in that area as well. They end up with some, like, they have the rainforest over there. They end up with some swamplands over there. They also have areas that can be very dry. There are dry and wet seasons. So we end up with a whole lot going on in that area. So because the region is on the equator, every place is pretty hot. But there are different like weather things that can occur. So they get a lot of heavy rains, which leads to a lot of flooding and big mudslides. They have a really tropical wet climate, especially along the west coast. And so that area tends to be very tropical and wet. Whereas like other places have a wet and dry climate. And so there's like literally a wet and dry season every year. There's a season where it's really wet and rainy, and there's a season where they get almost no rain. They also have in the northern tip of Colombia and like the northwestern coast of Venezuela, they have a semi-arid climate. And so it ends up, there's like an arid desert that lies in that region. And then when you're thinking about the mountains, the climate changes just within climbing the mountains. So the higher up the mountain you go, the cooler and wetter it gets. So lots of climate things going on. Because of all these climate things, you've got tons of different ecosystems happening. So we do have the rainforest there, and so they have some of the most amazing animals and most amazing plants that live in there. In your book, you'll see lots of examples of the different animals and plants that live in that area. You also get in that area that we talked about that has the wet and dry seasons, you have the wet season where or the dry season where they have a whole bunch of different things that live there. But then in the wet season, all of that gets really flooded. And so it actually ends up becoming like a really great hunting ground for crocodiles and otters and stuff. So their ecosystem really changes depending on what season they're in. As far as how it was settled, so like settlement and trade have always really been tied to that region. So Native Americans created a network of trade that linked the Caribbean islands to the mainland. And then when the Spanish came, they created another economic web that connected all the lands that were in the Caribbean Sea. So there are ports that were established by Europeans. A lot of settlers then went further inland because they didn't like all the insects and thought that they might have diseases and things. But they found fertile soil and cool temperatures. And so they ended up being attracted to settling into kind of the middle elevation of the mountains. In like Colombia, a lot of the European settlers reached the higher ground in the Andes by traveling through the river valleys. And so that happened as well. It did make it difficult to communicate, though, with people that were not living in that same area. And so that did kind of isolate the communities, and it made it a little uneasy for them to really be on the same page politically. Nowadays, in Colombia, 80% of the population lives in the higher, cooler elevations of the Andes. Its three largest cities are up in the Andes. Like we said, it has a lot of busy ports from the colonial days. Caracas is the capital of Venezuela, and it's the largest city in the area. Venezuela actually has the most urban societies. On the flip side, in Guyana, where like the lowlands are and along the coast, they have really small populations in contrast to Colombia and Venezuela. So people use the land in various ways. There's a lot of different things going on there. So along the coast where you have Guyana, they do, in those smaller populations, they grow a lot of crops. So they grow sugarcane and bananas and rice, and they export molasses and rum and shrimp. And so they have all of that going on there, and they have a lot of really fertile land. In Venezuela, they really don't grow very much food at all. There's not much land there that's good for farming. And so what they really found was that they have a lot of oil. They do some mining, but they have a lot of oil that comes out of Venezuela. And then Colombia is more back kind of into that farming. But for them, it's really nice because with the mountain, they have all those different ecosystems. So different things grow really well in different places on the mountain. And so even though they can only farm 2% of the land, they're able to export a lot. And so they export coffee and bananas, and they export cut flowers. And they also grow sugarcane and cocoa beans, oilseed, corn, and even tobacco still. Banana and sugarcane can be grown at the lower levels, whereas like barley and wheat and potatoes need to be higher up on the mountains. So they're able to use that, and they use what's called terraced farming, which is like they literally cut into the mountainside to make this like flat area that they can farm on. The population is crazy diverse there. There are not a lot of Native Americans left. A lot of them died off because of the diseases that were brought by the European settlers. So the Native Americans that did remain there did a lot of marrying with other groups that came. So they married some of the Europeans that came. They married some of the Africans that came. And so what's happened is they have this really, really diverse group of people that's been influenced by all of these different cultures. And so as you're there, you can see that like the dances have some influence from African and Indian and French traditions. You can see like the people that live in areas where the British colonies are tend to play a lot of cricket, which is a British sport. Whereas like in Venezuela, they love baseball because they have very strong ties to America. The whole area is very strongly connected with the Caribbean and islanders and that culture. And so a lot of the music is influenced by that. And they have traditions like Carnival, which are also influenced by that. So that is the end of your Atlas chapter, and I hope it helps.